Well, hello, church history friends, and welcome to an all-new lecture series. My name is Barb Walden, and it's a joy to welcome you to our first program in the spring lecture series, The Stories of the Scattered Saints. The response to the fall lecture series on this same theme was so overwhelmingly positive that we had to bring it back this spring to continue the exploration. I hope you're as excited as I am to explore the stories of the people and places connected with this fascinating period of Latter-day Saint history. So thank you all for joining us for the 4-week online lecture series. It's going to be a great one. But we also begin this evening on a bit of a somber note. A little over a month ago, on April 6th, we lost our dear friend and mentor, Alma Blair. Alma was a legend throughout the Community of Christ and Restoration History community. He educated and impacted the lives of generations of Graceland University students for nearly 4 decades. And rather than take time off between semesters, Alma traveled to Nauvoo every summer for 30 years to train interns at the Joseph Smith Historic Site. This training and Alma's passion for historical detail inspired so many future historians, curators, and lifelong church history lovers. So it's no wonder that the summer internship program at the Community of Christ Historic Sites was renamed the Alma Blair Internship Program in his honor in 2016. And honestly, I can witness that Alma was passionate about his research and he was curious to learn more about the world all the way up to the very end. So we are grateful that his legacy and his passion for preserving the past lives on in the generations of students, generations of summer interns and historic site visitors who had the privilege to know him, to learn from him, and to serve by his side. A celebration of life service will be held on Sunday, May 21st at 3 p.m. at the Community of Christ Church in Lamoni, Iowa. Lamoni is where Alma and his family called home for decades. Alma was 94 years old when he passed, and he will be dearly, dearly missed. So joining me tonight are my 2 co-hosts, Peter Smith and Lexi Frazier. These 2 are taking care of all the behind-scenes magic that come along with an online series like this. Peter serves as a board member for the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation and as a co-host of our Historic Sites Bus Tour. Lexi is serving her 2nd year as a summer intern in the Alma Blair Internship Program at the Kirtland Temple. So welcome, Lexi, welcome, Peter, and thank you both for joining us tonight. Our spring lecture series is not only a great way to learn church history, it's also an opportunity to help support church heritage. So donations that we receive during the lecture series will go to developing new educational programs. They'll go to help fund the Alma Blair Internship Program and to continue our ongoing support for the maintenance and preservation of all 5 Community of Christ sites. Lexi will drop the online donation link and mailing address into the chat for anyone who would like to support preserving Community of Christ history. Thank you all for your support, friends. And speaking of guest historian, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to my friend, Vickie Speek. Vickie is wonderful. She's a freelance writer and editor who serves as the new editor of the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal and the former editor of John Whitmer Books. Vickie is also the author of God Has Made Us a Kingdom, this great book here, James Strang and the Midwest Mormons, which won the Best First Book Award from the Mormon History Association back in 2007. Vickie has written numerous articles about the Strangite Mormons for John Whitmer and for the John Whitmer Journal. And she currently lives in sunny Florida, where she raises butterflies and collects books that she will never get around to reading, she says. Vickie's presentation this evening is called Polygamy, Perceptions and Power, How the Strangites Became RLDS. So welcome, Vickie, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'll turn things over to you as we are all eager to hear about these reorganites that were once followers of James Strang, and we're ready to hear about James Strang and polygamy and anything else you have to share with us this evening. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go over to share my screen right now. As he lay dying in Voree, Wisconsin, in July 1856, 3 weeks after he'd been shot by 2 former followers, James Jesse Strang whispered his last words. "Tell the brethren in a quiet way that I think we will have to draw off before our enemies." His last directions were for each man to take care of his family and do the best he could until he figured out what to do. Although Strang knew he was dying, he refused to name a successor. He died on July 9th, 1856, 12 years to the very day of receiving the so-called letter of appointment from Joseph Smith, Jr., naming him to be Smith's successor in the event of Smith's death. The unlikely but timely letter gave life to the Strangite version of Mormonism, as it arrived in Strang's hands 12 days after Smith actually had died at Carthage jail. Shortly after James Strang opened the so-called letter of appointment in July 1844, nearly a dozen men would also claim to be Smith's successors. In Nauvoo, a man and a boy appeared to be strong contenders: Brigham Young and Joseph Smith III, the son of the prophet Joseph Smith. Brigham was the president of the 12 apostles, but many members disliked him and said he had usurped the leadership of the church. Polygamy was an open secret in the community, and many people abhorred it. They looked for a leader more in tune with their own sympathies. Joseph Smith III was only 12 years old, too young to lead the church by himself. Those who supported young Joseph would need a proxy leader, perhaps William Smith, Joseph's brother, William Marks, who was a close friend, or Emma Smith, who was his mother. Those people would have to wait. They would need that proxy leader as they waited for young Joseph to grow up and take his father's mantle. In the meantime, the people of Nauvoo were living in a potential war zone. The saints had to vacate Nauvoo or risk losing life and property to a vindictive mob determined to drive them out of the city. Where would they go? Who would they follow? Many people trekked to Utah with Brigham Young. A few cast their lot with Alphaeus Cutler, with Sidney Rigdon, or Lyman White. Some found their way back to their own hometowns or to other communities outside of Nauvoo to live with like-minded people and continue living their faith the best they knew how. To a few thousand seekers, James Strang's organization seemed to be an answer to prayer. It was the most like the original Mormon church that Joseph Smith initially organized back in 1830. Strang saw angels, produced revelations, and found and translated ancient metal records. But over the next few years, Strangism failed to become the solution to their faith crisis. At first strongly opposed to polygamy, Strang married the first of his 4 plural wives in July 1849, and on July 8, 1850, on Beaver Island, he had himself crowned king of the world. As a result of these 2 policies alone, Strang lost most of his converts over the next 4 years. While thousands had been initially attracted to the church in Voree, there were less than 1,000 members left by the time Strang died in 1856. In short, the 2 reasons for leaving Strang were the same for not choosing to follow Brigham Young: misuse of authority and the abhorrence of polygamy. For those who stayed, James Strang's own murder in 1856 set up a second succession crisis that would eventually cause most of his former Beaver Island flock to join the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Just how many Strangites joined the RLDS Church is a difficult number to determine. To begin with, there's the problem of determining how many Strangites there were. This was firstly determined by where they lived. There were initially many more members in Voree, Wisconsin, Strang's first colony, than there were on Beaver Island, Strang's second colony. But Voree had a constant supply of people moving there because they believed Strang was a prophet, and moving out because they decided he was not. Strang had more staunch supporters on Beaver Island, but at least 131 members or people were either excommunicated or left the island quietly with their families because they no longer believed. It's also hard to determine the population of Strangites because Strang did not require his followers to be baptized if they had already been baptized into the Latter-day Saint Church. This is also true of those who later joined the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If a person was baptized into the Latter-day Saint Church and had retained a good standing in the organization, he or she could be accepted into the Strangite or RLDS Church on their original baptism. The ordinance was not required to be redone because both churches considered themselves the successor to Joseph Smith's church. The number of Strangites who became RLDS is also hard to estimate for other reasons. Small branches did not always keep accurate membership records, and the names of women and children were not always mentioned in church publications. In the case of the Strangite Church, James Strang had a tendency to overestimate the number of his followers. A good example of that can be found in my article in the latest issue of the JWHA Journal, titled "How Many Strangites Were on Beaver Island?" Finally, there were some people who became RLDS and were embarrassed about practicing polygamy as Strangites. They did not want others to know that they had ever been members of the Strangite Church. This was an emotional response based on the conflict with the Gentiles that had occurred on Beaver Island and the resulting expulsion of the people. My database of known Strangites who joined the reorganization, this is the first page of several pages. As you can see, these are only some of the A's that are listed. I compiled these names by comparing names found in the Strangite Finding Aid with Susan Easton's Black's 1993 file, Early Members of the RLDS Church. The Strangite Finding Aid is a database composed primarily of persons who associated with James Strang from 1846 to 1856. Names were taken from about 20 different sources, including newspapers, Strangite and RLDS church records, census records, and journals. It's not a complete list. There were many Strangites whose names did not appear in any of these sources, including several hundred children who were born or grew up in Voree and Beaver Island. I've included only the names of persons who were in the Strangite Finding Aid and who were also listed in the early members of the RLDS church list. There are many Strangites whom I believe joined the RLDS, but if their name was not on both lists, I did not include them on my handout, my database. On her list, Susan Black identified 33 persons who associated with the Strangites before they became RLDS. I have identified at least 176. That number doesn't sound like very many Strangites when you consider the 20,000 RLDS that Black counted over the years, but the number is more significant than it looks. Since the Strangite finding aid primarily shows the names of men, the number of women and children who are not listed needs to be factored in. If you take the number of Strangite males and add a wife and 4 children for each man, the number grows to over 1,000. That number is still small compared to the total number of people who are RLDS. However, when you compare it to the number of people who ever joined the Strangites, that number becomes substantial. You're talking about half the Strangite church converting to the RLDS church, maybe more. Historical records show a considerable number of former Strangites became important leaders in the reorganization. William Marks served as a Strangite bishop and a member of Strang's first presidency before he became a member of the RLDS first presidency. James Blakesley and Jehiel Savage were Strangite apostles before they were apostles in the RLDS church. Zenith Gurley, Jason Briggs, John Shippey, and Reuben Newkirk were Strangites who later became apostles in the RLDS church. And George A. Blakesley was a young man who was married at Voree, and he became presiding bishop of the RLDS. Former Strangites were also some of the most prolific missionaries in the reorganization. When it came to baptisms, confirmations, and ordinations, John Shippey, who lived both at Voree and on Beaver Island, is cited in Black's Index 371 times, and Zenith H. Gurley's name comes up 249 times. So you can see that the number was quite significant. While most of the members of the Mormon Church followed Brigham Young to Utah following the death of Joseph Smith, close to 1/3 of the total membership, perhaps as many as 6,000 people, maybe more, remained behind, uncertain what to do and who to join. Many of those people, 6,000 people, were attracted to Strang because he was anti-polygamy, and they were vehemently anti-polygamy. Strang reversed his course. In 1849, he married his first plural wife, a young teacher by the name of Elvira Field. As far as I've been able to determine, the marriage was never announced and remained a secret for at least a year and perhaps as long as 2 years. It's noteworthy that a large number of Strang's followers left the church between the fall of 1850 and the spring of 1851, when Elvira delivered her first child. The departure was influenced by Strang's coronation on Beaver Island, but I believe the major contributor was his involvement in polygamy. Jason W. Briggs was one of the Strangites who became disaffected in the early 1840s. Briggs had organized branches of the original LDS church at Beloit and Waukesha, Wisconsin. Under his leadership, these branches later converted to Strangism. In October 1850, Briggs was accused of spreading so-called lies about Strang that were almost certainly related to polygamy. Strang was absent on a mission to the eastern cities during this time frame, and he was indeed practicing plural marriage. Rumors had reached Voree that Strang's companion on this trip was none other than young Elvira Field, disguised as Strang's 16-year-old nephew, Charlie Douglas. In 1852, Briggs began associating with William Smith's group at Palestine, Illinois, near present-day Amboy, but was dismayed to learn that Smith was also practicing his uneasiness to the Lord. In a revelation, he was ordered by the Lord to share with others. Briggs was told to renounce all of his former religious leaders and to wait for the seed of Joseph. In other words, he should continue practicing the basic tenets of the Latter-day Saint religion until one of Joseph Smith's sons would take the reins of leadership. Briggs's revelation attracted the attention of many people in Wisconsin and Illinois, including Zenas H. Gurley, one of James Strang's best missionaries. In 1850, Gurley traveled to southwest Wisconsin, where a number of Mormons worked in the lead mines. Between November and the following August, Gurley and his missionary companion, Hiram P. Brown, converted 43 people. Gurley built up a branch of 23 members near the Yellowstone mines, which was about 10 miles east of present-day Mineral Point, Wisconsin. And Hiram Brown and his brother Elisha organized a smaller branch of 11 near the Pine Bluff diggings. Now, those were the lead mines where a lot of the saints worked after they left Nauvoo, either to earn the way to go west or to earn the way for their families to survive in Wisconsin and Illinois. Strangites in the Yellowstone branch in October 1851 were appalled to learn that their prophet, James Strang, had 2 wives. Under the leadership of Henry Deem, they immediately took out a newspaper ad in the Mineral Point Tribune renouncing Strang. As Gurley received a personal revelation confirming Briggs's message and renounced Strang. The entire membership of the Yellowstone branch accompanied him in leaving Strang and joining the Restoration movement. In June 1852, church members living in southwest Wisconsin and northeastern Illinois met in Beloit, where they affirmed the doctrine and authority of the original Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and await the coming of a direct descendant of Joseph Smith Jr. An organizational meeting was held on April 6, 1853, near present-day Blanchardville, Wisconsin. Of the 7 men chosen that day to be apostles, at least 4 were former Strangites. The year 1856 was an eventful one for both the RLDS and the Strangites. 2 reorganization missionaries traveled to Nauvoo in an effort to persuade Joseph Smith III to lead their church. But young Joseph, the eldest son of Joseph Smith Jr., was not yet ready to take the responsibility. Nevertheless, the new organization movement continued to grow. 1856 on Beaver Island was also a time of crisis for the Strangite Church, with the death of James Strang and the expulsion of his followers off the island. Destitute, homeless, and leaderless, the Strangites scattered. Some left to join the saints in Utah Territory, while others returned to their old hometowns, primarily in the east. The majority of the Strangites from Beaver Island gradually migrated to the area around Black River Falls in west central Wisconsin, where they found employment in the lumber mills. Some of those were the same lumber mills that had provided lumber to build the original homes of Nauvoo when the mills were worked by George Miller and his group. In October 1856, some of Strang's apostles called for a conference where they hoped to determine the future of the Strangite Church, since James Strang was dead. But the saints were so widely scattered, only a few members were able to attend. A meeting in December was also postponed due to poverty and severe weather. In February 1857, 5 of his apostles met in the woods 6 miles from Racine, where they prayed and communed with each other. The men became convinced they could not lead the church without a prophet and agreed that only God possessed the power to appoint that prophet. Strangites found themselves in the same holding pattern as the RLDS, as members in each denomination watched and waited for the leader who never came. But the long wait for the RLDS was almost over. In 1860, Joseph Smith III quietly traveled to Amboy, Illinois, to accept the presidency of the reorganized church. 300 people were assembled that morning for a conference. They were well aware of the efforts and the sacrifices that had been made to rebuild the church through Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Several items of business were accomplished that morning, and then Joseph Smith III walked into the room, accompanied by his mother, Emma. From what I read, there was not a dry eye in the congregation as the people realized that God had heard their prayers. I came here not of myself, but by the influence of the Spirit. I have come in obedience to a power not of my own, and shall be dictated by the power that sent me, Joseph said. Seeking a new leader themselves, Strangites visited by RLDS missionaries gravitated to the new organization. Several people who had strongly opposed Strang on Beaver Island also had joined, which kind of blows my mind. You have people who were opposed to Strang on Beaver Island also joining the RLDS church. And it's very interesting. Ari J. Moore, a merchant who had converted to Mormonism on Beaver Island after marrying a Mormon woman, moved to Iowa, where he was visited by RLDS missionary and former Strangite, John Shippey. Moore and his wife were baptized by Joseph Smith III, the new president of the RLDS church. The family, which included in-laws Benjamin and Lois Austin, moved to Nauvoo, where they enjoyed a very close friendship with Joseph Smith III and his mother. Young Joseph called Benjamin Father Austin and frequently went to him for advice. The first meetings of the RLDS church in Nauvoo were held in Benjamin Austin's small rented home. While members of the RLDS church finally had a recognized leader, the Strangites did not. On Christmas Day, 1863, 7 years after the death of James J. Strang, 112 Strangites met together for a special conference in Jackson County, Wisconsin. The purpose of the conference was to lay before the saints the necessity of becoming united in singleness of purpose as one personage. More importantly, the Strangites wanted to know what to do about Joseph Smith III, whether they should join the new organization or whether they should continue to wait for a prophet of their own. It was only natural for the Strangites to be interested in the RLDS church. The basic doctrines and beliefs of both churches were the same, and many of their friends and family members had already joined. The desire to belong to an organized church was reflected by Strang's widow, Elvira, who wrote to a friend, "There are times when I have almost given up the thought of there ever being a renewal of the church. But when these members of the reorganized church came and lived 4 miles from us and began to preach, it aroused a desire for a head of the church. It makes me want to have a place to go to meeting, and none of these other denominations will satisfy that longing." Strangite William Bickle also exemplified an interest in the reorganization. "We have commenced a correspondence with what is called the new organization," he wrote. "If there is anything in young Joseph's claims, we are going to know it." But there was a big difference in one doctrine in particular that kept many of the Strangites from joining any of the other Mormon groups. Unlike the Brighamites in Utah, who believed the 12 apostles carried the priesthood keys to appoint a new prophet, and the Josephites at Amboy and Plano, as those who followed young Joseph III were called, They believe the Josephites believed the line of prophetic succession should be carried by blood. But the Strangites believed only God or a living prophet could appoint a successor. Since their prophet, James Strang, had died without naming a successor, the choosing of a new prophet was now up to God. Many Strangites wondered how long they should wait for God to appoint a successor to James Strang and what they should do in the meantime. Strangite apostle Lorenzo Dow Hickey raised a point during the 1863 conference that he was to plead and argue for the rest of his life, and which unfortunately would lead to the near abandonment of their Strangite church. Hickey told the members that it was acceptable for them to join the RLDS church because on the night of November 6, 1846, 10 years before his death, James Strang had quietly crept through a window at William Mark's home and anointed the sleeping Joseph Smith III to be a member of Strang's first presidency. The action was done quietly and secretly, so no harm from enemies of the Mormon church would come to the young boy. According to Hickey, Strang's action made Joseph Smith III a member of the Strangite First Presidency, and thus the leader of the organization, but not the prophet. Hickey urged the Strangites to recognize the young man on the basis of Strang's revelation. The conference closed with the Strangites drafting a letter to Joseph Smith III telling him they were deeply interested in his welfare and the prosperity of his family, and that they would sustain him in the office whereunto God had called him by their prayers and faith. Young Joseph, he's not so young now, Joseph III welcomed the Strangites to the RLDS church, but refused to acknowledge that James Strang had ever been a legitimate successor to his father. Joseph Smith Jr. For the next 30 years, Hickey caused dissension within the Strangite church as he persisted in trying to convince members to accept his story about Strang and young Joseph. For many years, he exchanged a battle of words with Joseph Smith III over the supposed ordination, with Hickey insisting it was true and Smith insisting it never happened. Smith did recall seeing Strang at William Mark's home when he was a boy, but said it would have been impossible for Strang to creep through the window and ordain him while he was asleep, because Smith was always accompanied by his father's old dog, Major. The vigilant animal had attached himself to the young boy and never left his side. Some of the most significant converts to the RLDS church came from James Strang's own family. In 1883, Strang's third wife, Elizabeth Betsy McNutt, moved with her daughter, Evangeline Denio, to Davis City, Iowa, where Evangeline and her husband, John, joined the RLDS church. Betsy's daughter, Abigail, was also a devout member of the RLDS church for most of her adult life. It's not certain whether or not Betsy ever joined the reorganization. RLDS church records list an Elizabeth Strang who was baptized in 1879, but the brief entry lists no birth date for the woman and no place where the baptism occurred. Betsy's Denio grandsons later claimed that she never joined the RLDS church, but her son said that she did for a time. The son, Gabriel, said his mother soon left the RLDS to join the Whitmerites, and her daughters were very bitter against her for it. Given Lorenzo Dow Hickey's endorsement, nearly all the Strangites eventually joined the reorganized church. In 2003, none of Strang's descendants belonged to the church their ancestor founded, and there were less than 100 active Strangite members. In a way, the current Strangite church is very much like the RLDS church was in the 1850s. The members are patiently waiting for God to provide a prophet to lead them. These remaining members still follow James Strang's last directions for every man to take care of his family and do the best he could till he found out what to do. And that's it. Over to you, Barb. Let's see if we've got any questions.
Well, thank you, Vickie. Thank you so much for sharing the story of James Strang and the individuals who once followed him and later ended up in the reorganization. The whole story of Strang sneaking in through a window and Joseph III using his dog Major as proof that it didn't happen. I mean, that story alone was worth the cost of a ticket to attend tonight's lecture. So thank you so much for sharing these fascinating stories. It truly is an intriguing part of the Scattered Saints story, and I think we could have listened to you all night long. Friends, as you look on the screen now, you can see Lexi is sharing Vickie's document for us all to see. Vickie, feel free to comment as Lexi slowly scrolls through the list. For those in the audience, I hope there's a number of familiar names that catch your eye as you see the folks on the list. Are there others who were members of Strang's Church that you're tempted to write a biography on? Or if there are people in the audience just eager to find a new research topic, is there anyone on this list that you would highly recommend as having an intriguing story that we need to hear?
Well, you know, the Lancaster brothers, I can't remember their first names, but they're related to Anna and John Cole, who had to sneak out had to sneak away from Beaver Island in order to get away from Strang. And I think that's a very interesting story.
Yeah. So you hear that, everybody in the audience? That's a great research topic, or at least a homework assignment from our guest historian. And also, friends, if you're interested in learning more about James Strang, I encourage you to pick up Vickie's award-winning book, God Has Made Us a Kingdom, James Strang and the Midwest Mormons. It's published by Signature Books. In fact, you can find this fine book available for online purchase at the Red Brick store, and Lexi will drop the link into the chats in a moment when she ends her screen share. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to bring our evening program to a close. And Vickie, we really could listen to you all night long. So thank you so much for being an awesome guest historian, for joining us tonight, and for sharing your research with us and helping us officially launch the Stories of the Scattered Saints Spring Lecture Series. It's been a joy to have you here.
It's been a joy to be with you too. I've enjoyed sharing things and sharing my stories. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you. It may be your first time, but we sure hope it's not your last.
Wonderful.
Also,
thank you.
A big thank you to Peter and Lexi for helping out behind the scenes and making it all look so easy. And lastly, we share our thanks to our friends in the audience for your love of a good story and for generously supporting the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation. Thank you so very much. Now, there's a lot more to learn as the series continues on, and I encourage all of you to tune in next week as we gather with Amy De Rogatis and hear the fascinating story of Elvira Eliza Field, James Strang's first plural wife. So follow the link that Lexi just dropped into the chat to register for next week's lecture happening on Thursday, May 18th at 7 p.m. Central Time. So until then, keep reading your church history, friends. Take care and have a good night.